My father-in-law? Connor raised his champagne glass and smiled at the crowd. He's a good guy. Owns a little repair shop out in Pasadena. A few people nodded politely. Then he delivered the line that would destroy his entire evening. Some people are built for big opportunities. Others are happiest changing oil and fixing lawnmowers. The room laughed. Not everyone. Just enough. Enough for him to feel clever. Enough for him to believe he'd won. 340 guests watched my new son-in-law turn me into a punchline at his own wedding reception. The funny part? I paid for half the room he was standing in, the champagne he was drinking, the band playing behind him, and the honeymoon he planned to brag about later that night. Connor Walsh thought I was just an old mechanic with rough hands and a small business. He thought the pickup truck outside accurately measured the man driving it. He thought money was the same thing as power, and standing there in a designer suit he couldn't actually afford without financing, he made the single most expensive joke of his life. I smiled. I even raised my glass. Because the moment a man publicly underestimates you, he stops paying attention. And that is exactly when he becomes vulnerable. What happened next cost Connor far more than his pride. My name is Ray Callahan. I live in a 4-bedroom house in Cypress, Texas. Nothing flashy, good neighborhood, good school district. I drive a 2017 Chevy Silverado with 140,000 miles on it and a dent in the rear panel from a parking lot in 2021 that I never got around to fixing. My hands are rough. My clothes are clean and functional. I'm up before 5 most mornings. Travel mug, country radio on low, 30-minute drive to the facility. I am exactly what I look like. A man who started with nothing and built something real with his hands. What I am not is what Connor Walsh decided I was. Mara called me on a Thursday in February to tell me she was engaged. I was in my office at Callahan Defense Systems, reviewing production specs for a contract renewal. Outside my window, the manufacturing floor was already running double shifts, 1,400 employees, nearly 500,000 square feet, precision components bound for air bases across 3 time zones. When her call came in, I stood up. I always stand up when Mara calls. She was crying. Happy crying, the best kind. I didn't tell her I was doing the same thing. Connor Walsh was a senior analyst at Meridian Capital Partners, one of Houston's better-regarded private capital management firms. His base salary was substantial. He drove a leased 2024 BMW, wore a Rolex that cost more than a semester of Mara's college tuition, and had a way of occupying space in a room that communicated. I have decided this matters, and therefore it does. When I met him for the first time, really met him, over dinner, not the quick Christmas handshake, I noticed 3 things. He ordered wine without looking at the price. He spoke to the server like the interaction was a toll to pay rather than a person to acknowledge. And when I mentioned I worked in manufacturing, his eyes drifted slightly left the polite exit that people take when a conversation stops being useful to them. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Everyone puts on a slightly different version of themselves when there's pressure in the room. I decided not to judge too quickly. He did not extend me the same patience. Within 3 weeks of the engagement announcement, the quiet campaign to make me invisible had begun. It started with Mara calling, apologetically, to say Connor thought venue selection would be less complicated with fewer opinions in the room. Fine. Then catering these vendors require a certain kind of negotiation. Fine. Then the guest list, we need to be strategic about who's in the room. Fine. I wrote checks instead of arguments. $60,000 to cover the gap when their preferred venue ran over budget. $19,000 for the premium bar package Connor selected without asking who'd pay. $22,000 for the floral arrangements cascading white and blush roses throughout the Four Seasons ballroom, the kind of setup that ends up in wedding magazines. Connor never asked where the extra money came from. He assumed his salary covered it. 3 weeks before the wedding, he found me alone in the parking garage outside Mara's apartment. No one else around. He got directly to the point. Ray, I need you to understand what this wedding represents for my career. Meridian is sending partners, directors, people who hold serious influence over my trajectory. I need them to see a certain picture. He paused and straightened his lapels. I need that picture to be consistent. What picture is that, Connor? He gestured in my direction, not at my face, at all of me, at the whole of what I represented to him. I've built something from scratch. Everything I have, I earned. And I need the people in that room to see that clearly. Another pause. I can't have them getting confused by context. Context. That was his word for me. I nodded slowly. Whatever makes Mara happy, I said. What I didn't say, what I was actually thinking while standing in that garage, listening to my daughter's fiancé explain that I was a liability to be managed, was this. I founded Callahan Defense Systems in 1997. I leased 1,800 square feet of workshop space in Pasadena, Texas, with $14,000 borrowed against my truck and an idea for a better machining process for turbine shaft components. I worked alone for the first 14 months. I slept on a cot behind the press, because commute time was time I couldn't spare. I lost the first 2 bids I submitted. I won the third $400,000, a Boeing subcontractor, nothing glamorous. Those first 3 employees became 30. Those 30 became 200. 27 years later, those 200 had become 1,400, and the company they worked for was valued at just under $2 billion. Connor Walsh wanted me to understand his world. He had never once wondered about mine. The Four Seasons Grand Ballroom in downtown Houston. Chandeliers like frozen light, 340 people in formal wear, glasses full of champagne I'd paid for. My daughter in a dress so beautiful I had to look away from it the first time I saw her in it. I sat at the family table in a dark navy jacket, clean, honest, nothing performing, and I watched Mara dance with the man who had spent 6 months teaching her that her father was something to apologize for. The moment happened when Thomas Brecker, managing partner at Meridian Capital, made his way to our table. You could feel Connor recalibrate the instant Brecker appeared. He stood up straighter. His voice went up a register. He became a slightly different, slightly louder version of himself. This was the performance he'd been rehearsing the entire evening. Thomas, let me introduce you to my father-in-law. He gestured toward me with the relaxed indifference of someone indicating a piece of furniture. Not looking at me, looking at Brecker. He runs a little repair shop out in Pasadena. Keeps himself busy. The short, easy laugh. The laugh of a man completely comfortable in the moment. Completely certain of his audience. You know how it is. Some people are just more comfortable with small things. And there it was. 340 witnesses. My daughter's wedding. The man she loved, explaining to his boss that her father was small. Brecker looked uncomfortable. Several nearby tables had gone quiet. Mara's face turned the deep, sudden red of the roses I'd paid for, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully decode. Embarrassment for me, embarrassment for him, some complicated mixture of both layered over something I think was grief. I didn't flinch. I set my glass down, smiled at no one in particular, and walked to the terrace. Honestly, and I want to pause here and be real with you for a second, if that had been you standing in that ballroom, hearing those words, watching your daughter's face change, what would you have done? Most people would have said something right then, corrected the record, made it stop. Part of me, the part that spent 27 years building something real and never once asked for a standing ovation, wanted to. Badly. I didn't, because Connor had just told me exactly who he was, and I already knew with perfect clarity what I was going to do with that information. He called at 11:52 the same night. I was in my home study, still in the dress shirt from the wedding, reviewing quarterly projections Linda Park had sent. Linda has been my CFO for 16 years. She is the only person in my company, possibly the only person outside my immediate family, who knows the full picture of what I own and what I'm worth. She is also the most precise human being I have ever met, which is why I called her the following morning. But that night, it was Connor's number lighting up my phone. His voice had lost the wedding's performance polish. What replaced it was harder, more pointed. Ray, we need to talk. Before this goes anywhere, it doesn't have to. Talk then, I said. What followed was 20 minutes of Connor Walsh explaining the world to me. The portfolio he managed, $140 million. The partner track he was on at Meridian. The architecture of success. How image and association were not vanity but strategy. How strategy was survival at the level he operated. You don't get it, Ray, and I mean that without disrespect. The version of success you understand and the version I'm building don't look the same. They don't require the same things. I was taking notes. What do they require? I asked. Control, precision, the right associations, a pause. I can't have the people in my world wondering where I came from, what I'm connected to. I underlined those last 5 words. What I'm connected to. For another 10 minutes, he explained poverty as mindset, wealth as clarity, certain relationships as assets, and others, me, specifically, as liabilities. He said Mara had married into something larger than where she'd grown up, and everyone around her needed to understand what that meant. He said I seemed like a decent enough man, but that decent wasn't the same as useful. He said, I'm just being honest about how this works. I said, I appreciate honesty. And I did. Every syllable was going to be useful. The next morning I made 3 calls. The first was to Linda Park. The second was to my attorney. The third was to Thomas Brecker's direct office line at Meridian Capital, not to file a complaint, to have a conversation about service quality. Now I want you to understand how what happened next actually worked, because it would be easy to describe it as revenge, and that's not quite right. Every major client in Connor's aerospace-related portfolio at Meridian had some connection through subsidiaries, holding structures, investment partnerships to Callahan Defense Systems. I had spent 27 years building a network based on reliability and mutual respect. When Callahan's CFO raised concerns about account management quality, people listened, not because of fear, because of track record. By Tuesday of the following week, Linda had formally requested immediate reassignment of Callahan's account. No explanation given, no transition period. $80 million in managed assets, removed from Connor's portfolio overnight. He called me that afternoon confused, voice steady but working hard to stay there. Ray, something strange happened today. A major aerospace client, one of my biggest, asked to be moved to a different manager. You haven't talked to anyone, have you? I said, Connor, I'm a repair shop owner in Pasadena. Who would I talk to? Long silence. By Wednesday, a second client had requested reassignment, citing inadequate industry knowledge. By Thursday, a third had filed a formal complaint about unprofessional conduct that reflected poorly on Meridian's institutional standards. Linda was feeding me updates. He's been in Nestor's office twice. Looks like he hasn't slept. I felt no satisfaction reading those texts. I want to be clear about that. There is no version of watching a person's career dissolve that feels good, even when they earned the dissolution. What I felt was something quieter. The cold, steady certainty that actions carry weight, and that weight eventually settles somewhere. By Friday morning, the Houston Business Chronicle had picked up a vague story. A major Texas defense contractor, unnamed, had severed ties with a mid-level associate at a prominent capital firm, following what sources described as a troubling display of professional discourtesy at a private social event. No names. But in the circles where these things travel, dots were being connected at speed. Connor called Friday evening. The performance was completely gone. Ray, please. 3 clients this week. All aerospace. All citing my professionalism. I need you to tell me whether you're behind this. I said, you told me that real success means understanding the hierarchy, that money talks and mechanics should listen, that some people build empires and others stay small. I'm a repair shop owner, Connor. What could I possibly have to do with what's happening to your career? Empty silence. What do you want? He asked. I want you to understand exactly who you talk to that way. I hung up. Monday morning. The Meridian Capitol Tower in downtown Houston. 42nd floor. I sat in my Silverado in visitor parking for about 2 minutes before I went in. And here is what I was thinking, sitting there in the truck Connor had mocked, in the work boots Connor had decided made me small. For 27 years I chose to be invisible. It was a strategic decision. At first, anonymous ownership means simpler security profiles, cleaner contract negotiations, less noise around sensitive government relationships. But somewhere along the way it became something else. It became a kind of protection. If no one knew what you'd built, no one could use it against you. No one could want you for the wrong reasons. No one could look at you and see only the number. Connor had taken my invisibility and turned it into a weapon. He'd used my silence to define me as small. And now I was going to correct the record, not for my ego, because I genuinely don't have much of one, for Mara, and for every quiet person who has ever been summarized by someone loud. The conference room held 26 people, senior partners, managing directors, Connor's supervisor, Paul Nestor, Thomas Brecker, at the head of the table. Connor himself at the far end, the particular stillness of someone who has not slept in 4 days and knows that everyone in the room can tell. And Mara, seated near the middle, hands folded in her lap, her expression holding the careful neutrality of someone who does not yet know why they've been asked to be here. I connected to the room display. The first slide read, Callahan Defense Systems Corporate Overview. I heard someone across the table draw a short breath. My name is Ray Callahan, I said. Most of you manage approximately $80 million of this company's assets. What some of you may not know is that I founded it in 1997, built it from a single leased workshop in Pasadena, with $14,000 borrowed against a truck, and grew it over 27 years into a company currently valued at $1.9 billion. I am its sole owner. I am also, for those who haven't made the connection, Mara Walsh's father, the man your colleague introduced to several of you at his own wedding reception as someone who keeps himself busy with small things. The room was absolutely still. I clicked to the next slide. Audio file. I pressed play. Connor's voice, clear, unmistakable, pulled directly from the professional wedding recording, filled the conference room. He runs a little repair shop out in Pasadena. Keeps himself busy. Some people are just more comfortable with small things. I watched his face while it played. He was looking at the table with the fixed attention of someone who is trying not to exist. That was April 12th, I said. 340 witnesses, including several of your partners and clients. I clicked to a photograph professionally composed, crystal clear, Connor's hand extended in that dismissive gesture, his expression comfortable, certain, belonging to someone who had never considered he might be wrong. Later that same evening, Mr. Walsh called me at home to clarify his position. Second audio file. The late-night phone call. Connor's own voice, steady and unhesitating. I can't have the people in my world wondering what I'm connected to. Broke mechanics should listen. Some people build empires. Others stay small. Mara's hands had come apart in her lap. She pressed them flat on the table. She was looking at her husband with the particular expression of someone who recognizes a face they no longer know what to call. I proceeded through the remaining slides methodically and without drama. The 1997 workshop. The first government contract 2001, a Boeing subsidiary, $600,000 for turbine shaft components. The 2006 breakthrough contract, Department of Defense, $18 million. The 2015 restructuring. The 2023 valuation. Each document a chapter in a story Connor had decided didn't exist because the cover looked ordinary. I want you to understand something about that room. The air in it had completely changed. These were people who managed billion-dollar relationships for a living. They understood exactly what was on the screen, exactly what it meant, exactly what had happened. And they were watching the man responsible sit at the end of their conference table, diminishing in real time. It would have been easy, at that moment, to be loud. To use the documents and the audio and the financial statements the way a weapon gets used. Part of me, the part that heard my daughter's wedding go silent while her husband performed my worthlessness for an audience, that part wanted to level everything. But the longer part of me, the part that built something real over 27 years by caring about quality and character rather than about who was watching, just wanted him to understand. Mr. Walsh, I said, you told me that real success means understanding the social hierarchy. You said you couldn't have your colleagues wondering what you were connected to. I let the room breathe for a moment. I am what you're connected to. A company that employs 1,400 people. A manufacturer of components that protect the people who protect this country. A business built by a man who worked 14-hour days in a rented workshop and never once asked anyone to acknowledge it. I paused. And a father who drove to his daughter's wedding in a pickup truck and sat quietly at a table while the man she married explained to a room full of people that he was too small to matter. The silence in that room was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of something being understood. Paul Nestor spoke carefully. Ray, what outcome are you looking for today? Education, I said. And accuracy. Meridian has managed Callahan's account well for 8 years. That relationship doesn't have to end. But it also cannot continue as if nothing was said. I began collecting my materials. The decision about Mr. Walsh is yours. I've given you the facts. You know what they mean. Before I left, I looked at Mara. She was looking back at me with something complicated moving behind her eyes. Pride, maybe, or grief, or the dawning recognition that the man she'd allowed to be diminished had been carrying something enormous and silent for her entire life. "I'll be outside," I said quietly. "Take the time you need." Connor was terminated 4 days later. Violation of professional conduct standards relating to client relationships. Everyone in Houston's finance community understood what that meant. He came to my house on a Thursday evening 3 weeks later. I was in the garage, working on a 1969 Ford Bronco. I've been restoring for Mara, the same daughter whose husband had spent 6 months cataloging my flaws. He was holding a manila envelope, and he looked smaller, not physically, but structurally. The scaffolding of his certainty had come apart. He said he was sorry. Not the controlled, damage-limiting sorry of someone managing a situation a different kind, slower and with more weight. He said he grew up in a house where money was scarcity and status was survival, and he had spent his entire adult life running from that, and somewhere in the running he had started treating contempt like ambition. He said when he looked at me, he saw the thing he was most afraid of becoming, and he responded to that fear by trying to make it smaller than himself. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, I said, "I know why you did it, Connor. I've known people like you my entire life. Fear that performs as arrogance. Insecurity that sounds like condescension. None of it surprised me." I set down my wrench. What surprised me was that my daughter didn't see it coming. He had no answer for that. "Leave the envelope," I said. "Not for me. For Mara, if she decides she wants it." He set it on the workbench and walked back to his car. 6 months later, Mara filed for divorce. She called me the day she made the decision. I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports. She said she was confused and angry and embarrassed. Then she said, "And proud, Dad, really proud, that you never let him make you into what he decided you were." I didn't have words for what that felt like, so I didn't try. If you've ever been looked through instead of looked at, if you have ever sat in a room where someone decided exactly who you were before you opened your mouth, and you felt the specific hollow weight of being reduced, then you already know what that ballroom felt like. And I want you to hear this clearly. The people doing the reducing are almost always more afraid than you are. They build their self-worth out of other people's smallness because they cannot afford to examine their own. This story taught me that invisibility is a choice until someone turns it into a weapon. I chose to live quietly. I chose to let the work speak and keep the public identity on a shelf. I remained a man in a work jacket and an old Chevy because that's authentically who I am. And for 27 years, that was enough. The mistake Connor made wasn't just arrogance. Arrogance is common, almost boring. His mistake was assuming that what he saw was the whole picture, that because someone doesn't perform wealth in the expected way, they must not possess it. That because a man drives a dented truck to his daughter's wedding, he can be safely filed under small. The most expensive assumptions are always the ones we make before we ask a single question. Here is one thing I'd ask you to take from this story. Stop performing for people who have already decided you're beneath them. You owe no one a demonstration of your worth, not your credentials, not your income, not your pedigree. Your work is your testimony. Show up and do it. The right people will find it. And the question I'd leave you sitting with, is there someone in your life whose value you've underestimated because of how they look, or where they live, or what they drive? Really sit with that one. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a 1-inch the comments if you think Ray was right to do the boardroom presentation publicly. Drop a 2 if you think he should have handled it quietly, without the audience. Drop a 3 if you think the real story here belongs to Mara, not Ray. I read every comment and I genuinely want to know where you stand on this. Also, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? There's something that moves me about knowing people are sitting with this story at completely different hours, all around the world. Tell me in the comments. And if you've ever been in a room like that ballroom, if someone dismissed you and later learned the full picture, or if you were the one doing the dismissing, and wish you'd asked one question first, share it. This channel exists because these stories are real, even when they're reimagined. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something or think about someone, please subscribe. Hit the bell. New stories every week, and every single one of them is worth your time. Thank you for being here. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Houston, Texas to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, businesses, or events is entirely coincidental.